Good afternoon and salam. I'm Hanan El-Haddiwi, a member of the MACFEST team. I'm delighted to welcome you to MACFEST 2021. This afternoon, we are thrilled to host our second exciting panel this week, celebrating poetry, performance, and literature. We are delighted to introduce you to our host for this panel, Elizabeth Gow, curator at the John Rylands Library. Let me say a few words about Elizabeth, our speaker this afternoon. Elizabeth Gow is a manuscripts curator and archivist at the John Rylands Library, the University of Manchester. Elizabeth is responsible of manuscripts in more than 40 different languages, including the Persian manuscripts. This collection of nearly 1,000 manuscripts contains some of the most beautiful books in the library. Elizabeth is also halfway through a part-time PhD on the collecting and philanthropy of Enriqueta Rylands, 1843-1908, the founder of the library. Elizabeth, over to you, and thank you for hosting this event. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hanan. What a lovely welcome. I'll just attempt to share my screen. Get this up. Right, can you see that? Excellent. So I'm going to skip past that slide because you know this now. And just while I'm talking, you've got something to keep your eyes occupied. This is an opening from one of our manuscripts. It's a manuscript of the Shahnameh, which I'll get to later on. Now, I'm quite conscious that this is quite a different experience to what we'd normally be able to offer, inviting people into the John Rylands Library where you can see the manuscripts in real life. But what I'm going to try to do is give you a sense of these not just as paintings on a piece of paper, but their life within these books. So usually at this point, I'd be waving my arms across a table of treasures. So this will have to sort of stand in for that. Now, I'm not an expert in Persian painting or in Persian literature. And we're going to have there's going to be opportunities. If you've got any questions or queries or points you want to make, you can pop those in the chat. And my colleagues, Rakaya and Annie, will be keeping an eye on that, posting any links and sort of saving up for the questions for various points along the way. But I'm going to try to let the beautiful art and the manuscripts speak for themselves. So these paintings belong to books. They tell stories, they decorate. And one of the reasons they're so well preserved is because they've been sort of kept safe in these books. Books, we call them manuscripts, and that just means handwritten. So you'll be able to see all this sort of beautiful writing. So these books, they're thousands of pages, and they really are sort of outpouring of sort of love of the written word. So I do want to say a little bit about where we'd normally be, and we'd normally be here in the John Rylands Library, because I want to say a bit about how these amazing manuscripts came to Manchester, what they're doing here. The library was founded in the 1890s by Enriqueta Rylands, who, as you know, I'm doing my sort of PhD about her. When the library opened, which was on the 1st of January 1900, a nice date to remember, it didn't really have many manuscripts in. I think it had one Quran, but it didn't have any Persian manuscript. These came when she bought in 1901 the collection of manuscripts from the Earls of Crawford in Hay Hall in Lancashire. So most of the Persian manuscripts in the library came from that collection, and I think all of the ones I'm going to show you today did. So these are some of the greatest treasures in the library. They're world-class manuscripts. They were sort of made for, princely courts. And I'm going to start with, well, I'm just going to, this is Enriqueta. I'm going to show you 5 manuscripts I'm going to focus on. I'm going to show a few extra pictures along the way, but I'm going to focus on 5. And I've just got a little slide for each just to sort of give you an overview. Quite a few of them are works by Nizami Ganjavi, who was a famous Iranian poet. And then one Shahnameh, which you've seen the sort of illustration from already. And another text, which is like an encyclopedia of wonders. So between these 5 manuscripts, there are about 500 miniature paintings across them. I think I'm going to manage to get through about 40 of them, but I'll show as many as I can within the hour. And these 40 paintings were by about 9 or 10 different artists. Now, often the artists they don't sort of none of the artists name themselves in these manuscripts, but some of them have been identified as being the same as other artists, and we even have names for some of them. The manuscripts date from 1445 to 1632. And I'm now going to change my screen because we're not going to just do a PowerPoint. I want to show you the manuscripts themselves using our new digital image viewer. At the moment, this has only got 5 of our Persian manuscripts on there, but it lets us sort of turn the pages and look through them and see what they're like as books. So I'm going to start with Persian manuscript 36, which is one of the real treasures of the collection. It's one by Nizami Ganjavi. So he wrote, his most famous work is this one, which is the Kamsa, which means 5 poems. And Kamsa is a bit like hand. So there's a poem for each finger. Of these poems, they include 2 of the most sort of famous love stories, the story of Layla and Majnun and Khusro and Sharon. So I'm going to show you some of the pictures from those 2 stories. So, my page. I'm going to show you, because one of the amazing things about this is you can really sort of zoom in and see the details. So this isn't even a Persian miniature, this is just the inside of the binding. And you can already see the amount of attention to detail of this sort of carved leather with the gold and the colour. So, okie dokie. So I'm going to turn a few pages, and there are a few blank pages which you get at the beginning of most books. But then you see these amazing paintings. And this one, it's a bit tricky because if I was showing you the real manuscript, you'd see that there are these 2 paintings opposite each other on either side. But this is a hunt scene, and the amount of detail is phenomenal. And these paintings, we call them Persian miniatures. And that's not really because they're small, but it's because there's a sort of a world in miniature in them. They take sort of different components of the story, and they sort of, you can sort of read the picture and go around it and look and see what's happening. Just after these 2 amazing pages, there are 2 further pages which aren't a miniature, but these have this sort of decoration and they fine calligraphy, which I wanted to just show you, because the miniature paintings didn't just happen on their own. They're part of a book with this sort of glorious decoration in blue and gold. And when we say illuminated, that just literally means that it has gold. And in Persian manuscripts, you have gold, you might have gold leaf, there's gold paint, and there's gold ink. So you can see here, this is the main text, which is in a form of Arabic script. It's a special type of script that was used for writing poetry. But around it, there's these sort of decorative bubbles with gold ink. And then here we have the title, and it's written in a different sort of script. It's still an Arabic script, but this one's often known as Kufic. And you'll find it in like the buildings of mosques and tiles, sort of Quran inscriptions, but also in Quran manuscripts. So I am now going to go back to the miniatures. I'm going to link straight to this one. So this is a miniature from the story of, of Khusro and Sharon, and it's Prince Khusro before his father Hermes. But I think this is, you have the main characters here, but then you also have sort of musicians and courtiers, and you can see how the image is sort of framed by the text. This is an illustration of this text. I wanted to say here that this bit along the bottom, which is in a very sort of, it looks a bit like boring and grey and not quite as sort of beautiful and lustrous as the rest of it, but it's actually silver. So originally in the manuscript, this would have been sort of beautiful and glowing like the gold, and it represents a river. And you'll see in almost every image that I'm going to show you, you can have a look out and see if you can see the grey river, which should be silver. Now, I'm going to go, I've got a separate tab here, which I'm hoping is going to work. Because here I'm going to actually show you that that image that I was just showing you, which is here, is actually almost exactly the same as the image which was at the beginning of the manuscript. So these are both images within the same manuscript. The one on the left is part of the story, but the one on the right sort of introduces the manuscript as a whole. And you can see the musician and the river, although this time the river's got a rather lovely duck in it. And the musicians. What I love about this one, oh yes, there we go. There's this horse eating the tree, but he's not, he's only in the one image. There's always something lovely and special to look out for. I'm going to go back to the main manuscript. I'm just going to show you a few. I'm not showing you all the images. So this manuscript's got about 18 miniatures in it. I'm just going to show you some of these really lovely ones, which this one, you get this real idea of the beauty of the sort of patterns and the way they sort of render the architectural detail, but also this sense that the illustrations aren't just in a box. They're sort of part of the page and they interact with the text. So here, it comes right up to the top above the text there. And then here you have this swirl of rocks and mountains. And if you look really carefully, I mean, the scene is supposed to be Sharon visiting Farhad, but here, peeping out from behind the rock, you see a shepherd, and he's trying to rescue his flock from a perilous position on the mountain. Okay. Sorry, this is a little bit clumsy going from one image to the next. If we had the manuscript in front of us, I'd just be turning the pages and it would be very simple. But here you can really zoom in and see. And although I said that they're not miniatures because they're small, being able to look at them like this, you sometimes you don't get a sense of the size. So they're about 13 centimeters high. So they're not very big. But when you look on the screen, you can zoom in. And, you know, you might, if you want to go back and look at any of these on your own, I'm going to post some links at the end, and you can spend, well, as much of your life as you like, sort of zooming in on these images and seeing the real sort of detail. So this one we have here is Khusro and Sharon seated together on a throne, listening to the learned discourse of Burzug Amid. So their tent is somehow resting on these golden lions. And at the bottom, we can see this grey again, which should be silver. Here you can almost see that it would have had this sort of swirly texture on it, and you can only sort of imagine what it must have looked like when it was brand new and shiny. And I think we have sort of Sharon's maids here on the left. I love the way they peep out from behind here. And the courtiers to the right. And you can tell this is a special thing, partly because of the detail and the fineness, but also just the sheer amount of gold. The sky is gold. The rivers are silver. Again, if I zoom out a bit, you can see the trees peeking out from the top. So the last page I'm going to show you on this manuscript isn't a painting, but it brings us back to the manuscript itself. If I can get to it. I'm going to go to the last page in the manuscript, if I can find it. And here, you know, there's hardly any text at all. There aren't any paintings, but there's this beautiful decoration. And there's this bit of text at the top, which is a bit of text which is really important in manuscripts, not just Persian manuscripts. And it's called a colophon. But what it is, it's a bit like a title page. It tells you about when and where the manuscript was copied, who did this sort of handwriting. And this one doesn't tell you the name of the scribe, but it doesn't tell you where it was made, but it does tell you exactly when it was made. And there's actually a colophon for each of the 5 poems. So the first poem was finished in December 1444, and the last poem was finished in May 1445. So just the copying of the writing, just of the text, took over 6 months to create this book. And that doesn't count the amount of time spent on the paintings and the decoration. So that's a really special thing about this manuscript. It really gives you an idea of how this thing was made and what a lot of time and effort went into these works of literature and art. So I'm going to go to the next manuscript, which is another work by Nizami, but this one, instead of having the whole Kamsa, it's just got one of those poems, which is Khusro and Sharon. It's quite a small book, so it's only got less than 150 pages, but again, it's absolutely beautifully done. So you can see the binding is another gorgeous binding.
Yes.
And inside, this is actually a later little painting of the rose, probably even from the early 19th century, whereas the manuscript, this one's not dated, but because of its sort of style, we know that it was probably copied in the early 1500s. Whereas the other one was one artist, this one, there are at least two different artists, although only 5 paintings. But these two artists are quite famous. And I'm going to find one of the pictures. So, and this, you can actually just even just the margins of the pages are speckled with gold and tinted. This would have been a sort of lovely pink color. And so in this painting, again with the gold sky, and there's a silver river down the middle, which is a bit tricky to see, but if I zoom in, you might be able to see just coming out of this spring. And it's a painting in which Sharon sees a portrait of Khusro, which is in the tree. Now, if you imagine just how small, this portrait's only the size of a postage stamp. But if we zoom in, I can't even zoom in that far. You can see that it's just done with absolute care and precision. And these lovely birds in the tree. The tree peeks out over the top as well. I like these peaking trees. Oops, sorry. So I think that this, this painting, it's not just something happening in a scene, but it's all about the sort of wonder of nature and the beauty of poetry and love are there in the painting as much as they are there in the text. I mean, I just think these are absolutely gorgeous. So this poet, this painting, I've lost my thing which tells me who the artists are. Here we go. So the artist is a man called, well, possibly, he's not named, but because of how similar it is to other paintings of the same date, is possibly Abd al-Samad, who worked in the 16th century, so in the 1500s. And he started off in Tabriz, but then later moved to India with the Mughal court, where he became one of the leading painters under Emperor Akbar. So really one of the most famous artists of the day. So the other artist in this manuscript is just as famous, if not even more famous, Mir Saeed Ali, who lived from 1510 to 1572. And again, he started out in Tabriz in Persia and moved to India. And here we have Farhad carrying Sharon and her horse, which is a great feat of strength there. He doesn't look bothered. She looks quite relaxed. I'm not sure if I'd be that relaxed on a horse. We have again this lovely gold sky with the clouds which sort of show that influence of Chinese art. I'm just wondering if there's you see this one's, I was thinking that there wasn't a river, but actually, if I look here in the corner, you've got this little bit of grey, which would have been a silver river. But you can really get a sense, of the characters moving through the scene. It's not just a sort of stilted image where nothing's happening. They're moving along, they're chatting, they're going somewhere. And it's just so brilliantly done. And here again, it comes just slightly out of the frame. And it's not like the artists have got it wrong. It's not like they did these people a bit big and then it had to go over the frame. It gives it that sort of life. So, did I have any more in this one? Yes, I did. So anytime you can come onto this website and you can click through and there's information about what the images show. So this one shows a lovely image of Khusro and Sharon after their wedding feast. They're up in the bedroom. Again, the tiles and the architecture. Just trying to sort of scroll around so you can see some of these bits. Little bird in the tree. Here it's the mountain that's gold and the sky is blue. And we have a gardener. I don't know, maybe he doesn't seem to know what's going on. Yeah. I'm going to, I don't want to run out of time before we've seen everything. I'm going to move on to my, well, now I was about to move on to my third manuscript, but if anyone's got any questions at this point or wants to sort of see anything again, then Ruqaiya and Annie.
Yes, we have had a few questions actually. There's been some really interesting discussion going on in the chat while you've been talking. So I'll just give you the first question we had, which comes from Florence. And Florence wanted to know why the silver in some of these images has turned to grey.
I think it's just a question, it's tarnish. So if you've got any sort of pieces of silver hanging around like a spoon or something, silver tarnishes really quickly. It oxidizes, so it combines with the oxygen in the atmosphere to form this sort of black material, which is tarnish. Gold is very stable and doesn't tarnish. Now, you can polish silver, but every time you polish it, you remove a tiny layer of it. So while you might polish a silver spoon or cup, we don't polish the silver in manuscripts because it's just so thin.
Very interesting, thank you. Okay, I think Ruqaiya, did you have another question?
Absolutely, we've got loads of questions coming in. And the next question's from Pia, I hope I've said your name right. And it's about, does the picture of the shepherd rescuing his flock have any reflection in the story or the particular text on the page?
I don't know. My feeling is that it probably doesn't, although there might be like a sort of symbolic meaning. But I think I don't know the stories well enough, but it might be something that you'd like to look up.
Okay, we had a question from Aisha, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, as well, she asks, I'd love to learn more about the type of pigments that we use to achieve such vibrant colours, please. Can recognise gold and perhaps lapis lazuli. The greens and pinks and purples are really vibrant.
Yeah, the colours are amazing. We do have some blogs about the colours, particularly in Persian manuscripts, because at the library we've got a team of imaging specialists, and one of the things they can do is analyse the pigments to see what they've been made from. I don't know whether Annie and Rakaya will be able to find that information about colours.
We can definitely give it a go, and if we can find the link to that blog, we'll share it in the chat for everybody.
Thank you.
Was there, Rakaya, did you have another question?
We've got one, I think some people might have joined a little bit late. Elizabeth, would you mind telling us again how these manuscripts managed to come into the library, or and why we have them?
Yeah, I will do that.
Thanks.
So the manuscripts came into the John Rylands Library in 1901, which was the year after the library was opened. The library was founded by a lady called Enriqueta Rylands. She inherited a huge amount of money from her husband, John Rylands, who she named the library after. After the library opened, when the library opened, it didn't have all that many manuscripts in it, and it didn't have any illuminated Persian manuscripts. And she bought the manuscript collection from the Earls of Crawford, who lived in Hayhall near Wigan. And they had collected a really important manuscript collection. And one of the big strengths of that collection was its Persian and Arabic manuscripts. So there are about 1,000 Persian manuscripts in that collection. Well, no, there are 900 Persian manuscripts in that collection, and we've added about 100 since. Crawford got most of his manuscripts from other collectors, whether sort of in continental Europe or in Britain. Most of the illuminated Persian manuscripts came from a character called Nathaniel Bland, who was a scholar of Persian, and he did quite a few translations of Persian manuscripts. He sold all his manuscripts because he lost his money through gambling. So it's not a very happy end to his story. But that's essentially the short story of how they got here.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We have another question from Adele, who asks whether there is any Chinese or Turkish influence in the facial features of the figures depicted.
I think that's probably a question more for someone who's more of an expert in Persian miniatures themselves. I do know that there is some Chinese influence. I know that also in some of the later manuscripts, some of the artists make there's a distinction between Western, like European faces and Iranian faces, and some of the manuscripts, because the Persian tradition was also sort of carried to India, where it became very strong, and Afghanistan, but sometimes sort of local dress is reflected in the people as well.
Great question. We also have another one. We've got a question about why do Persians depict rivers with silver?
I'm not sure exactly, but I suppose that water sparkles. But I don't know whether that perhaps also sometimes in the poetry there's something about rivers being silver. But I think it's also partly just to have that sort of contrast between sort of colour and tone. in the image.
Okay, I think we have. Do we have time for more questions, or we could save them for the end? It's just aware of time, Elizabeth, and people have so many questions that I feel like we could carry on all day with this.
How about I show a couple more manuscripts, and then if there's time, we can sort of come back to these questions, and we might have prompted a few more as well.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, so please do keep asking questions in the chat, everybody, and we'll save them all, and we will try and get through as many as we can.
Yeah. So I'm going to come to a slightly later manuscript now. So this one was copied near Shiraz in about 1575. Like the first manuscript, it has a beautiful illuminated title page. And this is a sort of style which is known as Safavid. And we've got, in fact, the first Arabic manuscript that was bought for the library, which Enriqueta bought in 1891, was a Quran manuscript decorated in this same style. So this is yet another of Nizami's kansas. I am showing some other texts as well, but these, I think he was such a popular poet, and he wrote these sort of versions of the poems, which were very sort of poetic and beautiful versions, but they were also ordinary and accessible to people. They weren't too sort of high, you know, they didn't exclude people with their language. But now I'm going to sort of move on from the images of Khusro and Sharon and go to Layla and Majnun. And I'm going to just come across, I need to hide this bit here and look at, so I wanted to look at this particular scene in it, which is a scene of Layla and Majnun at school. And this is when they were children and they sort of got to know each other and they fell in love with each other. But one of the reasons why I love this scene, and you can see that we have this scene, even just at the Rylands, we've got it in 3 different manuscripts. In this one from 1575, this one from the first manuscript, which we looked at from the 1450s, and this one here. So there are some similarities. You can see that they've all got these book stands, which the books are resting on, which I understand are similar to the book stands used now when people are sort of learning to read the Quran. I'm just sort of looking, after that question, I'm trying to sort of look at the faces and see if you can see different influences in the different manuscripts. But you can see that they're all centered on the schoolroom, but there are other things going on. In the picture in the middle, there's not much else going on. But in this one, on the left, you've got these 2 extra scenes to the right, which you can see they're in different rooms. And in this, those extra scenes are given below and above, picking some blossom. This one on the right, it's a shame we've only got like a couple of the images digitized, so I couldn't show you the whole manuscript. I'm going to go back to the manuscript to show you an image, although I need to get to a particular page. For some reason, it's not going straight there. Here we go. So Majnun falls head over heels in love with Layla. And I think Majnun is actually, it sort of refers to him being mad. It's not his real name, it's the name that he's given. And it sort of ruins his life, really. And his father, who's here on the left, begs him to go to Mecca to ask God to release him from this love and bring him back to God and to sort of living his life. But he comes to Mecca, which you can see here. And instead of asking God to release him from his love, he begs for more love, and it really gets worse from there. But the reason I'm showing you this picture is actually this little figure in the corner, which in the manuscript is sort of tiny, but I think it's been thought that this actually, so this figure, and he's holding like his prayer beads, is actually a self-portrait of the artist. So we don't know the name of this artist, but we have a rather nice portrait of him. Okie dokie. So I'm going to come back here to show you another scene, which is in 2 manuscripts. And this is a sort of camp scene. And Layla and Majnun, so you can recognize Majnun because he's not wearing very much. And Layla, and they've fainted having seen each other. They love each other so much. Now, this is the one on the left, I think, is a reasonably sort of typical version of this scene. Beautifully done with the sort of gold sky. And we have the river is down in the bottom. No, that's not a river, sorry, that's rocks. I apologize. But on the right-hand side, we have a different version, which is quite unusual in the way it's laid out. And it's also unusual because this is my trick one, but this isn't actually a Persian manuscript. So someone asked about influences of Turkish art, but this one is actually a Turkish version of Layla and Majnun, not Nizami's version. It was written in Turkish by a poet called Nawai, but again from this sort of 5-part set, the Kamsa. Now this manuscript is also unusual because we've just got one story, which is Layla and Majnun, but we know where the other 4 volumes in the set are, and they're at the Bodleian. And although this one's not dated, the other one in Oxford is dated 1485. So we know that because this one comes from the same set, it would have been written at about the same time. And I said at the beginning about these being sort of princely or sort of royal manuscripts. This one was actually made for Prince Badi al-Zaman, who was the son of Sultan Hussein Mirza of Herat. So there's a very close relationship between sort of Turkish culture and Persian culture. And this one also, like that other one I showed you, has got this beautiful gold specking. And also while we're here, they don't just write the poems in straight lines. Even the way the lines are arranged is beautiful. So now, I'm about to move on to the Shahnameh, so it might be worth taking a few questions here before I move on to the big manuscripts.
Okay, so we've had a couple of questions. We had a question about I think this was sent anonymously, but it asks, are the paintings dotted throughout the manuscripts, or do they appear in sections or at the beginning or the end?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it depends. It's different in different manuscripts. Some manuscripts only have a few, some have got lots, and the two that I'm going to show you next have got lots more. These ones that I've just shown you have got them dotted throughout the manuscript, but there are also a couple where you have those two at the beginning and they've often got two at the end. And I think that was very sort of typical of Shiraz in particular. They tended to do, I think some of the manuscripts only have those two at the beginning and the two at the end, but I think it's much more typical to have them dotted throughout.
That's great. Thank you, Elizabeth. The other question that we had asked was about any information on any specific techniques that are used in this manuscript to get these amazing miniature paintings.
I don't know. I know that, I mean, that's sort of outside what I sort of really know about. I know that they had brushes which were so fine with just sort of one hair from the sort of finest sable, you know, and that there's a lot of sort of technique in the way that the paper's sort of polished to give a shiny surface, and then the gold would be, the gold leaf is sort of burnished and polished as well. But I think that's about what I know. You might find out more information from sort of books about Persian art.
Thank you so much. It's so hard to know everything, especially on such a wide subject as this, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I don't want to pretend to be an expert in things that I'm not. So I'm going to go on and we'll have a look at our glorious Shahnameh manuscript. Now, where are we? This I'm going to show in this particular viewer, and it's a bit harder to get the whole page, although maybe if I do that. Aha. So the Shahnameh is the famous sort of epic poem of Iran, and Ferdowsi, its author, is the national poet of Iran. Now these books, whereas the other books are reasonably small, only a sort of about 20 to 30 centimeters high, Shahnamehs are big books. They're sort of 30 to 40 centimeters high. They're fat, and they're often chock full of images. This one has got about 100 miniatures. Let's shift that smaller again, because I'm actually talking about this one on the right hand side. It's got about 100 images. There is a colophon which tells you when it's copied, but it's been sort of altered, and so we're not quite sure what it means. It might be, so it looks like 924 in the Islamic calendar, but it might be 904 or 944. We don't really know what the number in the middle is. So it could be anywhere between 1498 or sort of 1578, I think is the region. But even despite this sort of uncertainty about when it's copied, it's got paintings by at least 5 different artists scattered throughout the manuscript. And these aren't, it's not like one artist, the first fifth. They're sort of overlapping and intersecting. And these artists, again, we don't really know their names, so they're called Painter A, B, C, and D, and E. There's a group of 3 of them, which are all from the sort of Shiraz region in around the 1520s. But then there are 2 others who are much later. And with these, it's not like the earliest ones are necessarily the best, but there's a difference in how the painters work. So I'm actually going to go here. this is our old system, but this manuscript isn't yet on the new system. So I'm just looking at it here. But because it's such a unique one with all these different artists, I wanted to show it to you here. So the first artist, called Painter A. So this, according to the sort of cataloguer, so these were catalogued in the 1980s by an art historian. According to the cataloguer, there's a commercial Turkmen influence. So again, this influence from Turkey. I'm afraid my internet is going slightly. Usually you can sort of zoom in and it looks lovely. This isn't quite doing that. I don't know why not. And this scene is, according to the caption, is Rustam kills Val's white elephant. You can't actually see him killing the elephant in this scene, but it is a lovely elephant nonetheless. But that's what I wanted to show you from this other manuscript, where the elephant is slightly less recognizable to us as an elephant, but it's definitely being killed by Rustam. So Rustam is one of the great heroes of the Shahnameh. And we call it an epic poem, but it's a sort of combination really of lots of different epics. So there's, Ferdowsi sort of took a much earlier Persian text called the Book of Lords, which doesn't survive anymore. And that recounted the stories of the ancient rulers of Persia up until about 640, as well as Iranian mythology and folklore, and he combined these things together. So Rustam was a very famous hero, and he performed feats of strength and daring. There's also Khusro, and we've heard his story about Khusro and Sharon, which was revived by Nizami. And another sort of character that appears is Iskander, who we know in Europe as Alexander the Great, but he's got just as sort of important a role in Persian history as well. So that was Painter A. I'm now going to go to Painter B. So Painter B, just thinking if I'm, here we go. Pages keep turning. So this, it's called a tapeable Tabriz style. So from the sort of Tabriz area, and it's Rustam catching Rakish, who's this sort of horse, and we'll recognize the grey river and the beautiful gold sky and these sort of Chinese influenced clouds. Painter C isn't just capable. Painter C, and you might recognize this, this is the painting that, the opening that I showed you right at the beginning, is possibly Mir Said Ali, who was the artist who painted in the first manuscript that I showed you. And so here again, you've got this real sense of movement, and the way you've got these two images, which aren't of the same scene, but they sort of seem to relate to each other. Someone coming to, it looks like an unhappy end up there. And so these paintings were probably from about the sort of 1540s. I've got another painting by the same artist. No, I haven't. Oh, yes, I have. 411. Nope. Sorry about this. I'm losing my numbers. Here we go. So here we have Gur, who's another of these great heroes, killing a wolf in India. So it might not look particularly like a wolf to us, but this is the wolf. And one of the reasons why I picked this image is because although it's a Persian manuscript, it's actually got an 18th century Indian binding. So as well as Persian artists going to India with the Mughal courts, Persian manuscripts went to India as well. And I think the collection really shows how strongly those sort of traditions are associated. So that was the early painters. There are two later painters. One of them is described as, again, competent. Oh, sorry, I need to zoom out. Go. Sorry, we're just waiting for this to load. So you can see it's nicely done. There isn't anything wrong with it, but nor is it quite as sort of dynamic, or it sounds like a snobby word to say exquisite, but that difference in the way, you know, these are some nice flowers, but they're not those absolutely perfect flowers that some of the other artists get. And so I'm going to move from our poor painter D, who really was doing better than any of us could do, well, than I could do, definitely. And then painter E, who is later, but he's starting to do something really exciting. So he's got, again, this sort of very dynamic style. Oops. And the scene is Isfandiar's fourth labour as he kills the sorceress. So we can see the sorceress isn't in her human form, but she's like this sort of magical bird. And the way, I don't know whether these birds up at the back are her friends, but the way these clouds are just sort of sweeping across the sky and everything sort of moves. I think it's a beautiful painting. And then the last one I'm going to show you from this manuscript is by the same artist, but it's a quieter scene. Sorry, and this is Iskander, who's Alexander, attending the dying Dara. So we have, like in those earlier manuscripts, a river coming up from a stream, from a spring. We have flowers which you can, sorry, the page keeps turning, flowers which you can almost say that's a particular sort of flower. It's not just a generic flower. And then, like the other manuscripts which we were looking at, it's not just kept in that little rectangle. It goes into the margin. And again, it's not like it goes into the margin because the artists have got anything wrong. It's because it makes it much sort of stronger. They're almost coming into the picture. They almost live in the same world that we do. So now the last manuscript that I'm going to look at, and I'm just going to go straight there, is not a literary text. It's not a poem. It's much later than the other one. So this is about 1630, it's 1632. And it's a work which is sort of titled, the translation of the title is Wonders of Creation by Kazuini. And he lived in the 1200s. So, you know, a really early medieval writer, but this book was so popular, it right up until the 19th century. So there are printed versions of this, and it was also very popular to illustrate. And this manuscript alone, it's got about 500 pages and 355 miniatures. Now, often this book, the miniatures aren't really very good. They're a bit rough and done really quickly because there are so many of them. And here, oh, I'm going to just before we move on, I'm going to show you the inside of the binding, because it's like that first one we saw. It's just a beautiful thing. And it's a bit that, you know, not many people would necessarily look at. And if you get a book about Persian miniatures, it's not going to show you things like that. But when you look at the manuscript as a manuscript, you can see them. So some of the pictures aren't even filled in. And you get some where they've just drawn the outline. So if you're interested in seeing how the paintings were made, you can sometimes see the evidence of that in these manuscripts. I've just realized that we're about to run out of time. So I'm going to just land on one picture. There are so many, but there's a nice one near the end. Oh, this one, which has this glorious bird here and a rather ordinary magpie here. And I just love the contrast between this sort of real life and this magic. So I think it's about 5 o'clock by my watch. Do MACFEST want to come back?
Yes, listen, Elizabeth, you're fine. Please do share. Don't worry about if we go over a minute or two.
Okay. I mean, I think what I'd just say is I encourage you to have a look on the library website, go to Manchester Digital Collections. I think Annie can sort of post the link in the chat, and have a look just through this Persian Manuscript 3, and just, there's phenomenal things in there. There's the Nilometer, there's astronomers, there's angels and astronomy, all sorts of things. So just take your time and have a look through yourself. But it's been such a pleasure. And thank you for all your interesting questions. And I suppose if there are any that I can answer now, I can do that.
Elizabeth, I think we've just got so many questions.
Okay.
You would be here till like 7, 8 o'clock.
Okay.
But would you mind if I popped your email down in the chat, just so if anyone does want them answered, they can just email them to you? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. It might take me a while to get back to them, because at the moment I'm working 2 days a week, so I'm probably not going to be able to do that for a bit of time, but I will do my best to answer those.
Fantastic. So I'll just put that contact information there, and hopefully they'll get in touch with you, and be patient, because we're all working with difficult situations in this current climate, aren't we?
Okay, Elizabeth, thank you so much for such a marvelous event. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure our attendees feel the same. I personally love miniature paintings, and what a feast we have at John Rylands Library indeed. I hope all our attendees enjoyed it, and especially these beautiful manuscripts. Last year we had this event at the library and we saw them, and it was absolutely wonderful to have a close look. But today's event, because we're able to zoom in and out and see the intricate detail, I learned even more. I guess other people will agree with me. It works to have it like this. I really seen a lot there, mashallah. Thank you also to your colleagues, Rokeya and Annie, for helping, for supporting Elizabeth with the showcasing of these manuscripts and with the questions. And now for the attendees, guys, if you enjoyed this event, listen, you've got a feast tomorrow as well, mashallah. We've got 2 events tomorrow. Once at 12 o'clock at the Manchester Museum. It will be digital, just like this one. And we will be looking at the Islamic artifact with the museum team. Then in the afternoon, we have another treat for you all the way from France, from Dr. Zoher Adrisi. She will be actually exploring the history of colors over the centuries, including in the Muslim countries. So that really will be a treat for us. And then lo and behold, on Sunday, we have a treat of a different kind. It's our second youth panel. If you want to hear the views of 6 young people from around the world talking about what life is like during the pandemic, about Islamophobia, about Black Lives Matter, please do join us for that. On Tuesday, we've got a treat for you, a literary treat. Books, can you believe it? With 2 wonderful women, one from South Africa, Khalila, another woman from Afghanistan, talking about, they're both booksellers, love books, and that's going to be great. So I'm going to stop there. You've got the festival timetable, it's all there, but I do want to give a shout out. We've got 3 people who were attendees here today. One was Adele. Adele is hosting a panel during March about creative people. She's Australian, she lives in Germany, and she's going to be hosting a filmmaker, an artist, a writer, a publisher from around the world. The other lady is Dr. Amine. She's going to be hosting an event on March the 8th, talking about the stories about Pakistani women, and particularly the women from the Qaisra Valley. So that will be a treat. And I want to say welcome to Ahmed, who was here from Turkey, and he's one of our panelists. So thank you to all our regulars, including my own family and the team. So I hope you have a wonderful evening, and thank you for joining us. Assalamu alaikum and goodbye.